Hey class, let's go over our Unit 5, our Learning Assignment Unit Module 5, and let's go to the questions that we are having in here. And so the first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to identify the steps to the process, such as a formulation of cash flows, development of cost of capital, which is the weighted average cost of capital, and the calculation of decision matrices, including net present value and the internal rate of return. All right, so let's start here with the weighted average, okay? So that would be our WACC. And our weighted average is basically how much it costs for money to be borrowed based off of bonds, stock, and preferred equity. So in there is that what we have here is that we have three things that we are using to borrow money. So in finance, a lot of times we don't have the capital to pay for things with cash. What we have to do is we have to borrow it. Now, either we have to borrow it through bonds, or we're going to have to sell equity so that we can get the amount of money that we need so that we can produce something or provide a service that provides income of that. So one of the things that we need to look at is how to do that. And here what I did is I said the WACC is 10%. A lot of times we just come up with the WACC, it's given, or we do the long calculations where we find all three different things that need to come into play. So the next thing is cash flows. So what happens here is that cash flows are usually negative. So I would say that I decided to build a movie theater. Well, of course my cash flows are going to be negative in year 0. I built a movie theater, and what I'm hoping for is that that movie theater is going to be amazing, and it's going to be great, and it's going to generate income for many years. So in this example here, let's say that it cost me $100 million to build a movie theater, because I built this amazing movie theater in here. And then when I looked here at year 1, I didn't make very much money because people were going to different movie theaters. They didn't know about my movie theater. So I spent word of mouth started to take off. In year 2, I made $50 million. In year 3, $90 million. So what we did was we cut this in half. So when looking at this, what I want to do is I want to look at it and say, how much does it cost me if I was to put all that money back into the net present value? So what that means is taking that 15 million, 50 million, and 90 million, and we know that 90 million in 3 years, because we studied the time value of money, is going to actually be a lot less than today than in 3 years. So I would rather pay someone $90 million in 3 years than pay him today, because if I was to pay him today and I discounted that 10% using my net present value, or using my present value calculation, so that would be present value equals future value all over 1 plus rate to the time power. So in there is that I know that that would equal $67.62 if I just took it at $90. And when I add these all up, I find out that I have a positive net present value. It's greater than 100. I've made money. In this case, I made $22.59, which is great, but what happens if I wanted to get more money, right? Let's say that I wanted to say, okay, well, in here is that $22 million. Would you be okay if you borrowed $100 million and you borrowed it at 10%, and with discounting it all that ways and paying that off, you netted $22 million. And so the answer to that question might be yes, because it's positive. It means that's going to increase shareholders' wealth. All right. So let's look at the internal rate here. And then so therefore the internal rate of return here is 19.65. It gives us a percentage. How much money, after we discount this, are we getting so that we can be positive? And it's above 0, so that means that we're making some money, okay? So the calculation forcing the NPV project to equal 0, Then we can go and look at the internal rate of return, and we find out that it is 19.65. All right. Now, when we do all this and we go back to our question, identifying it, we find out that the cost of capital is our WACC, how much it costs to borrow. Then the next one is the calculation decision matrices, which is our net present value and our internal rate of return. So we do those to find out if it's a positive, good to go project. Now the next one here is that we utilize to predict and project success failure in terms of shareholder wealth. What that means, are we borrowing money and are we selling capital that's going to increase the shareholder wealth to the maximum amount? Sometimes we don't do that. We think we are, but we're not doing it. We're losing money. So if the net present value of a project is positive, the project should be undertaken, and expected results will be that the shareholder will increase on the amount. So let's say that we are just a retailer and all I sell is men's clothing, right? And I decide now to sell women's clothing, and it produces a positive NPV and a positive internal rate of return. Should I sell women's clothing? In this case, yes. Now, sometimes there are strategic reasons why we shouldn't, but in this case, it is a positive return on there. So anytime there's anything positive, it's giving us a maximization of shareholder wealth. Now, discussing how two types of decision methods are developed and different formula methods. So how do they differ? You can use those examples up here that I had for that as well. So you can do that to give you the answers here. But how they differ. One is a dollar amount. One is projecting that we will be making $22 million. The other is saying that we're going to make 19%. One can differ a little bit based off percentages versus dollar amounts. Okay? So sometimes it's better to, I personally like dollar amounts. Someone might like a percentage. And so the percentage is maybe that they only choose projects that have an internal rate of return of 15%. Because in their history, they know that that provides them some type of wiggle room. The next one here is place special emphasis on how new projects analyze different replacement projects. So sometimes we have to have an expansion. An expansion would be, I'm a men's clothing store, I'm going to sell women's clothes, right? In there is that the expansion is, do I do that? Well, what happens now would say that the men's department store is saying that we're going to continue to replace items. Let's say that we sold suits for a very long time and now they're starting to go out of fashion. With more telecommuting, more people in the office less, maybe suits aren't selling anymore. So do we replace that? Explain that. Explain the difference between expansion and replacement. Sometimes maybe I have at Disneyland, I might have a ride that's really popular and I have no choice but to replace it. Maybe the ride at Disneyland is the Pirates of the Caribbean or the Jungle Cruise. These classic rides that require it, but at the same time I want to expand, so I can't tear up the Jungle Book to place in a Marvel's Avengers land for the expansion. So go ahead and look at that in that part of it. If you have any questions on this, I'm always here to help. Make sure you look at the review paper as well that I posted. Have a blessed week, guys.